advantage of those. So again, my name is Laura Schoppe. I am the founder and president of Fuentech. We are a technology transfer consultancy in Cary, North Carolina, but we work globally. We work with government agencies, corporations, universities, all to help in the technology transfer activities. And we leverage those capabilities in what I'm going to be describing to you today, which is the TABA aspect of what you can get from SBIR. I happen to be a mechanical and aerospace engineer, but I have my team of folks span all the way from cancer researchers through aerospace. So we pretty much can cover every technology area. Okay. So what is TABA to begin with? It was originally developed in 2019 as part of the John McCain Act. And it basically replaces what had been the Discretionary Technical Assistance, DTA program. And it's specifically meant to help companies further their technology developments in the SBIR program from being just research to commercialization. And so the government has funded SBIR with the intent of creating innovations for many years, but they've struggled with helping make sure that that funding turns into products later on. So that was their primary reason for this additional funding, to help small businesses stay focused on the research that they're doing, but augment those activities with somebody who can look at it from the business perspective. It's also meant to minimize risk for you, as well as the risk of the technology commercialization, whether that is that you develop it and sell it, or that you license it, or that you partner in some way. But again, the goal is to move those technologies forward in a way that will benefit the economy. And it could also be in a manner of benefiting the government. If this is a technology that they want and need, which is likely since it's a topic that they are funding, if you are able to sell more of those products, the price comes down for them, the risk comes down for them. So it's also self-serving in wanting you to be more successful. So that's the reason for it. Now, what are you allowed to use that TABA funding for? So you can use it for a variety of things. And I will, excuse me, say this several times throughout, that this will depend on which agency you're working with, what you're allowed to use the funding for and what you're not allowed to use the funding for. What I'll be presenting is kind of the basics, but there could be subtle differences between them. So you should always read carefully before you submit your proposal and you make your request for the TABA funding as to what is acceptable and what's not. So generally what they want you to focus on is getting more market research, understanding who the market players are, what the market size is, what the structure is, the value chain, how do you fit within that? And so again, getting that augmentation from somebody else who specializes in that to help you understand how your research can move forward into the market. Getting market validation. So not just that you've created a really cool new mousetrap, but does somebody actually want that mousetrap, and how much are they willing to pay for it? And are you within that ballpark? So what falls in there is often customer discovery, in talking to the people that you would be licensing the technology to or selling the product to or partnering with. Are they willing and interested in what you have to offer? And is it in the right price point? IP protection. You can actually use some of this funding to get patents or to develop the strategy for moving forward with your patent technology. So that can be very costly. So having this to augment that could be beneficial. And I'm sure our second speaker Kevin will be able to address any questions about cost, but ballpark, we usually say getting a US patent is about $20,000 because of legal fees and everything that goes into it. And if you go international, it could be $100,000 to $150,000. But I'll let him correct that later. If you are doing anything that has a regulatory path, getting your plan together, your development plans together, manufacturing plans, this can all be used to get consulting services to help you figure those things out. If you're in the pharmaceutical sector, regulatory pathways can be very expensive, and making sure you've got the right expertise there. Getting your partners lined up. In many cases, because you are small businesses, you may not be the one that manufactures that technology. You may need to partner with somebody, you may need to outsource. So identifying those players, getting them lined up and ready to go as you develop that technology past phase 2 and are there ready to help you make that technology a product. Actual product development and can include product sales as part of that. That typically is more phase 2, whereas phase 1, you're more likely to be dealing with the market research and maybe some market validation work, but phase 1 tends to be more market research or developing your plans. You could also use it to help in some of the fundraising activities, but again, you got to check to see which agency will cover which costs. Now that's what you can use it for. What can you not use your funding for? Anything that you do internally. So you cannot pay yourselves internally. So it can't be part of your research activity or the development. This funding is separate from the R&D for the SBIR. So you have to have a vendor, somebody external to your company that you are paying for that support. Now it might be some technical support. If you've got a technical problem, that might relate to the R&D you're doing, you can use this funding to pay an external player to give you technical support, but you cannot use it as part of your research and development activities. You also can't use it for general maintenance, payroll services, things like that. There are a couple of agencies that might allow you to use it to buy software for doing your accounting systems, but not for actual services to do your accounting. So again, be very careful there as to what is acceptable and what's not. And John mentioned that you can get reimbursed by North Carolina for the development of your SBIR, which is wonderful. You can't use this funding for that. So use different pots of money for different activities. So what is the TABA funding? It is a supplement to the R&D money that you are asking in your actual SBIR. So when you write that SBIR proposal, you are laying out your statement of work, you are figuring out all of the funding to do the actual innovation activities, and that has a limit to it. This is funding in addition to that. It doesn't take away from any of your R&D funding. It goes on top of your R&D funding, and it also does not impact your ability to win. So they don't look at this until after you have been accepted from a technical perspective. And it has limits as well. So for a phase 1 SBIR, you can get up to $6,500. That will also vary by agency, but most of them are at the $6,500 level. And what they are looking to do there, again, is that risk reduction and improving commercialization. So most of the time, what they would like to see you do is get a market-based assessment and develop your IP strategy as part of that phase 1 TABA. And the point is that in a phase 2 proposal for SBIR, they're going to ask you for your commercialization plan and your business plan, and this information feeds into that. So if you don't ask for TABA funding and you don't get this external support, when you go to write your phase 2 proposal, you're going to have to do all of that because it's still going to be required in your phase 2 proposal. So why not get somebody else to help you out with that who specializes in getting that kind of market research, because you specialize in your technical area, but don't necessarily have the resources or the time or the access to databases to get the right kind of market and patent research data. So that's really typically what you would focus in on for your phase 1 TABA funding. Of course, there's other things you could be doing. If you've already gotten all of your market research, maybe you want to start with your patent filing. Totally legit. Phase 2 can be up to $50,000. So that's a much larger chunk of money, but your activity is also progressed much farther, and your funding for phase 2 is also much larger than what it is for phase 1. And so again, this is on top of your R&D funding, so it doesn't compete with it. And what normally you would see happening during the phase 2 would be, in the use of your TABA funding, is that customer discovery. It's really initiating those relationships that you're going to need to be successful in the commercialization of the technology. So talking to potential suppliers, potential partners in outsourcing that technology, licensing the technology to ensure that it does go to commercialization. Some of those may also be potential acquirers of your company. So there's a whole bunch of aspects to that customer discovery. And that's, again, more primary market research, so picking up the phone and talking to people, which is not a comfort zone for a lot of researchers, but it is something that people that do this for a living know how to do and know how to ask the questions. Another aspect of that customer discovery and why you want a third party doing that is when they are talking to those players, they can be much more frank because they're not calling your baby ugly. And so we're able to really discover a whole lot more information about how your technology could be beneficial if only it could do X versus Y, or that before they're willing to engage with you, they want to make sure that they see results that are A, B, and C. And so they might not tell you those same things as they would a third party. And it's also harder to hear when it's your baby and they're criticizing it. And so again, having that third party gather that information, interpret it for you, and then provide that feedback can be much more beneficial. The other really good thing to do during your phase 2 is initiating your IP coverage. So if you started that innovation in phase 1, in phase 2, you're furthering that development. And again, it's costly to get patents. So putting some money aside to make sure that you can get coverage for that patent so that it can move forward into commercialization is a really important thing to do. And that technical expertise. So in phase 1, you came up with the concept. In phase 2, you're trying to really implement that, but you run into some issues. So what do you, can you get some external resources to help you solve some of those problems? So those are just a few of the things that are fairly typical, but as I said, there's a variety of different ways you can use that funding. And it's agency dependent on how much money you get in each one of these phases and how you're able to spend that. So read the solicitation carefully. Now, who participates with the TABA portion? Most government agencies participate with SBIR, but not all of them are offering TABA. And so this is a list, and when you do get a copy of the presentation, these are all hyperlinked to their pages to make it a little easier for you to find the solicitations and what the limitations might be. Generally, they're all, again, at 6,500 and 50,000 for the phase 2, with a couple of exceptions. Now, DoD, I did it at the high level, but each one of them, the Army, Navy, they all have slightly different caps. So I've seen at the Army, for example, in one portion of it, it was a $5,000 limit on phase 1, but others are $6,500. So you've got to look at it and make sure you're working with your vendor to scope the work that they're providing for you appropriately, so you don't go over, or that you don't ask for more than what's available in your proposal. So a few of these players, a few of these agencies have what we call captive TABA vendors. And so they have already set up contracts with somebody to help provide that TABA service for the SBIR company. And in those cases, you may not have to ask for TABA funding. It might just be an automatic, you are going to get it. So for example, a portion of NIH has what's called a captive vendor. I think it's called VinTech. And you don't have to ask for TABA funding. They will automatically do the analysis of your phase 1 activity as part of what NIH provides for you. So the solicitation will tell you that, and will tell you whether you have the ability to request your own TABA vendor or not. Even the ones that have kind of preferred, what they call preferred vendors, these are people that they have provided some funding to, and they have used in the past. You can use those vendors, but again, make sure whether the solicitation says you have to request it during your proposal phase or not. or you can request your own TABA vendor on top of them. And so we've seen that happen as well, that for a variety of reasons, they might want a separate vendor who has more expertise in a particular area than what the preferred vendor might be. So DOT, parts of NIH, EPA, and USDA all have preferred or captive vendors. So if you're going after any of those, again, look at the solicitation and find out whether you should be asking for TABA or whether you're automatically going to get it, and whether you are allowed to or should name your own TABA vendor. Because if you have to name your own TABA vendor, you have to get a letter of support from that TABA vendor. So it's a little bit more work for you, but it gives you some of the freedom of choosing who you want. So how do you request your TABA funding? So if it's not part of what the agency already provides, which is in most cases, they're not providing it for you, you must request having TABA funding in your proposal. And there's a section in there, it's not very long, like a paragraph or two, several paragraphs maybe, of why you want the TABA funding and what you're going to use it for, but it's pretty straightforward. And so again, it does not impact the criteria for selection. They will not look at it as part of the technical review, and you have to pass that level before they would ever look at the TABA portion. So it will not change whether you can win the solicitation or not. Again, unless they're providing the service, you have to request that support as part of your proposal, both in phase 1 and in phase 2. If you did not get TABA funding, request it, or it wasn't part of what the agency provided as part of your phase 1, but you are going into phase 2, you can ask for TABA in phase 2. It is not a requirement that you had it in phase 1, and therefore you won't be able to get it in phase 2. You can ask for it in either one of those, and you should always ask for it in both, because it's essentially free money and free services for you. So there's absolutely no downside for you in doing this. There's only positives for you. You can use multiple vendors, so you do not have to have only one vendor that you are asking. So for example, one of the agencies is allowing $6,500. You may want to provide half of that to a patent attorney to do a prior art search and help start developing your strategy for your patenting, and you may want to spend the other in doing some initial market analysis work. So that's really up to you and working with the vendors to get those quotes. But again, you don't want it to be more than what they are willing to provide. If you are having your own selected TABA vendor, the agency can actually reject giving you the TABA funding if they don't like what you're using it for, or reject the vendor if they don't feel that the vendor is qualified for doing the work. And so be careful in who you're selecting, and that they are in fact qualified and capable of doing the work you're doing. So giving the money to your cousin is not a good plan if your cousin has absolutely no expertise in this area. So it won't fly. So what do you need to do in order to, what do you have to include in your proposal in order to request the TABA funding? So again, in your proposal, there'll be a section, I just looked at a NASA solicitation, it was section 7, that says, what do you plan to do with your TABA funding? And so again, it can be 1 to 2 paragraphs of just talking about, I want to look at the market and make sure I understand what are the different market sectors and who the players are, so that I can predict what my market potential is going to be and how I am going to get to commercialization. Again, the government is looking for a path to commercialization and a reduction in risk. So whatever you write up, that's what you want to focus on. You will also need a letter of support from whichever vendors you want. And that letter has to include what service are they going to provide. Again, brief description. What's the cost estimate for providing it? So if you've got an attorney and a market researcher, each of them would give you $3,000 here, $3,500 there. You don't want it to be more than $6,500 total. and then what their qualifications are to make sure that they are not rejected so that you can use that vendor and you get the TABA funding. Many of the agencies are also asking for a DUNS number from the vendor so that they can verify that they are qualified and that they are registered for government activity. So here's just an example of what a letter of support would look like. So in the top part, it is just, this is what we are going to do for you. As you can see, it's only a paragraph. It's very straightforward. And you can leverage what is written in that top paragraph to write your section in the proposal of what you're asking for and what the TABA funding is for. So allow the vendor to help you in writing that, from the sense of get the letter from them first, and then you write your section to pull off of theirs. The cost estimate of how much, and then what are their qualifications to actually do that work. We also tag on an extra page of the specifics of what our address is, our DUNS number. We also have cage number because we do lots of government contracting, how many years we've been in service, and just a little bit more detail about who we are. When it's a phase 2 proposal, we actually have a third page that gets added onto that, and that is a more detailed scope of work in laying out what's going to happen. So what should you expect to get? So for phase 1, you should expect to get information that is going to help you write your phase 2 proposal. If it's not, you're probably wasting some of your money, and it's going to cost you, because you're going to have to then do that portion yourselves when you write that proposal. You're not going to be excused from writing your business plan section and your commercialization plan section just because you didn't get TABA funding. So you're still going to be required to do that. So what we typically do in our deliverables is we'll give you at the front of it sort of the overview of the conclusions and recommendations of how to move forward. We'll give you the market assessment of how you fit within that market, who the players are, what the competition is for you, essentially, an IP landscape. There's actually a whole lot of graphs that go along with that, but basically, do you have room to get your patenting? Now, this is not a prior art search, but it can feed into what your attorneys do very well. And it's a great starting point to really understand who's out there, both from competition perspective, but also potential collaborators with you. And then also the technology assessment of how does this compare with what's out there. So this is kind of the minimum of what you want to make sure whatever vendor you get is able to provide for you, because this will fit into what the information you have to provide in your phase 2 proposal. So what are kind of the tips of how to be successful here? In your request for TABA and what your vendor says they're going to do for you, you want to make sure you are hitting the points of why the government provides the TABA funding. So improving commercialization and de-risking. So the improving commercialization, for the most part, is more of the phase 1 type of things of developing those plans and making sure you address what you're going to have to write in that phase 2 proposal, because it'll make your life easier. And it improves your chances of winning a phase 2 proposal, because they are much more in tune with looking at your commercialization plan and your business plan for a phase 2 than they are in the phase 1. So it's serious business at that point. They are looking for sales that are to somebody other than them. They want, again, that de-risking of the price will go down if you sell more products, or it's more likely that you are going to be able to produce that if you are selling to more players. And ideally, they would like it to be to the commercial sector as well, because they want to improve the economy. They're going to want to see, and you're going to want to know from your own business plan perspective, what's the market size, who the players are, how do you fit within that market, and what is the go-to plan moving forward? What aspects are advantageous that you are bringing to the table, both in the benefits of the innovation, but it could also be in your IP positioning. So making sure you hone in on that messaging, and that's essentially your value proposition, which is in business speak, part of your whole business plan. And again, that pathway. What is your pathway to getting to commercialization? Making sure you understand that from a business perspective, because it will help grow your business, but it's also in making sure you address that in your phase 2 proposal. On the phase 2 portion of it, you tend to focus more on the de-risking. So protecting the intellectual property, getting your patents filed and things like that. Solving any issues that you've run into. That's where you can hire external technical expertise to solve any issues that have cropped up. Developing and implementing those strategies and vetting it as well. And so that's that primary market research of picking up the phone and talking to the players and verifying that the plan you've laid out is actually viable and will move forward. You can also potentially sell product as part of that. Create some of the marketing materials and start creating that sales path and initiating those partnerships. And those partnerships could be anywhere from sourcing to potential buyers. So a variety of ways that might move forward. And with that, I will hand it back.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Laura. That was a terrific overview of a kind of a somewhat mysterious program, at least for us, in that it's relatively new, and the fact that all of the agencies can have different scopes. So I'm sure there are a good number of questions, but let's hold off on questions until we go to our breakout rooms at about 10:15 or so. So Kevin Flynn, if you want to go ahead and share your screen and kick off your presentation. You with us, Kevin?
Kevin, I think you're muted.
Unmuted.
Perfect.
All right. And I have multiple screens up, so I want to make sure I'm sharing the right screen. Let's share screen 1.
And thank you, Laura, again. That was really excellent. What a great program, and good slides, very, very targeted. So much appreciated.
Yeah, TABA is free money. Don't leave it on the table.
All right. So